Okay, this was my first Xcode tutorial. I'm going to jump right into Xcode and create a new project. There's a lot of different options in Xcode for iOS or OS 10 apps, but we're going to focus on the Cocoa Applescript build. And it puts some frameworks in. We'll just give it a product name, just the application name. Doesn't matter, irrelevant, just something. Then we'll create the project. And it builds, puts some frameworks in and kind of creates a shell. I like to set it for a target of 10.8. A lot of people are still using OS 10.10 and 10.9, so um, we'll, we'll, and there's some other objects, some assets and things in the project that we don't really need to even focus on right now. Um, so we'll look at the Applescript. We basically, this code is what happens when it starts. This is what happens when it ends. Those are both basically empty. These are all the what are called interface builder outlets or properties, or as Applescript would call them, variables. So this is just, just define your variables going into it at the beginning, and then um, we everything that's really happens in the project as far as the Applescript goes is taken care of by a handler, which looks just like the application will finish launching handler and the other two. It begins with an on and ends with an end. The name's irrelevant. The underscore and then the brackets or the parentheses with the sender is required in this syntax. And you'll get used to the syntax once you do a couple of these. It's really not that complicated. So um, in the main menu, XIB, it's basically, this is just a default window that's created. And there's a lot of settings here. We're not going to go through all these settings. We're just going to focus on the ones that we need. But you can kind of browse through and get lost in this if you don't really know what you're looking for. So I'm going to just try to focus on what we're looking for. So these are all the frameworks that you might add if you were building different apps, different types of apps um, for iOS or irrelevant. We're not really going to be focusing on that. Um, this list right here is really our main focus, and these are the objects that we're going to be dropping into um, our main interface, main menu. And this is just media. If you add buttons or music or sound or um, graphics that are going to show up in this media list. But there's tons of stuff here that's presets for other kind of apps if you were building other kind of apps, which we're not going to get into at this point. Um, in another tutorial, I'll show you a few that I've added. But for other services that you might use in an OS 10 or an iOS application, those resources would be found there. So we're going to start with just a button, just a basic button. So we're going to get into just the very basics of how to tie the code to the interface object. So we'll just grab just a basic push button, just drop it in the interface. Defaults are all come in the same. You can name it whatever you want. The name's irrelevant. It's just text at this point. As you can see, there's guides. Interface Builder is really good about helping you line up multiple objects, keep everything consistent. Apple has spacing standards that you kind of have to abide by if you're going to build an app for the App Store. But if we run this project, it's going to build the app, and we created a button. We click on the button. It doesn't do anything because it's not tied to any of the handlers that are in the Applescript yet. So that's what we're going to focus on, is the handler. So I did create a handler called do something, and inside of that we would put some code, and we'll just start with a display dialog, just something simple, just so you can see how to tie the two together. So we're just going to take this and we're going to control click and drag this to the AppDelegate. The AppDelegate is going to pop up with the handlers that are available. Do something is one we created. So now that button is tied to the Applescript, as you see, do something outlet. So the button step 1, and when we run it and we click the button, pow, it runs the Applescript, which does nothing more than display a dialog. So that is the first step, is building the interface and then tying those objects to the handlers. I expand on a little Applescript here. So with the display dialog, you can get really advanced with it. You can create a title. I should have done this in my previous tutorial. As you see, the title shows up at the top of the dialog. I should have expanded on some of the display dialog features, but there's so many. It's you just you'll catch on. So I'm going to say with the icon, add an icon, and there's a few that you can add, 0, 1, 2. I think there's 3 different icons that are part of Applescript that you can add in. Not really that useful, but, and then let's see, I need to take that out. So just buttons. You can define your buttons. So the buttons are OK and cancel, but you can change them to whatever you want. So we're going to say nada and find then. So that's with brackets. It's closed with brackets. So when we run it, click the button. Let's see, run it, click the button, we'll get the dialog, and we see the buttons have changed. We got the title, we got the icon, and we got 2 buttons that are defined with text that we want to see. Nothing happens when you click the button though, because there's no more code after that. So there's nothing there. So we're going to take a step further, and we're going to add some code here that basically is returned when you press a button. You can also set the default button. So we're going to set the default button to, you can pick either string. You just got to use the quotes. So you just say copy, paste. So the default button is going to be find then. And that just means that that button is going to be highlighted when that dialog is displayed. So do something, step 1. That's the default button. So it's just, well, you don't have to click on a default button. You can just press return, and it'll accept that as the result of that dialog. So anytime there's a dialog and there's a button, there's always a result. So what we're going to say is, if the button returned of the result is the default button, which is find then do something. So what I want to do is, I'm just going to display another dialog. This is kind of redundant, but I don't want to make the code overly complicated, and redundancy, I think, at this point is kind of helpful. So let's see, you clicked a button, and then the if statement has to have an end. So if and end. There's if, then, else, end. So if you click nada, nothing happens, but if you click find then, it executes this code, which is you clicked a button. So that's a little bit of Applescript inside of this handler. So let's see, let's take this a little step further. I wanted to get into how to tie some variables into the Applescript code, because you can go back and forth. There's AppleScript variables and there's Xcode, or actually ObjectiveC variables. ObjectiveC variables are always defined by a property. And the syntax starts with lowercase, has to have an uppercase letter in it, and it can say anything. It could be a descriptive word. It can be as descriptive as you want it to be. For this one, we'll just say my name. So there's the capital N, and we'll put a value in this one. So we're going to store a value in this one out of the gate. And then we can use that value, we can use that variable in the Applescript as it exists, which you may want to do if it's a constant. And then when we run this, step 1, find then, you clicked a button, Kevin. So it uses my name, the value stored in my name, which is Kevin, in the dialog. So that's one use of a ObjectiveC variable. You can also define those on the fly. We could set an Applescript variable of the same name. The syntax is different. There's no capital letter. We're going to set my name to Kevin here, and we're going to use the Applescript version of a variable called my name. I should have used a different name, but that's okay. But it does the same result. It still uses that value. It's not using the ObjectiveC value, it's using the Applescript value of that variable, my name, from the predefined variable set my name to Kevin. So there's a couple ways of defining variables, but if you're going to use them in the interface, they cannot be Applescript variables. They have to be ObjectiveC variables. So we have label text. It's just static text. It can say anything, just a label. There's a lot of properties. You can change the color of the label. You can change the font size, all kinds of things. You can make it as creative as you want. And I've got an example I'm going to show at the end here that does just that. So let's see. I do not want that to be selectable, so I want to set the behavior to that to none. I'm going to create a text field, and text field they have a lot of properties as well. But you can't, just remember, you can't store an Applescript variable in the interface at all. So it has to be converted to an ObjectiveC variable. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. The names of the objects, like that one just says text field, irrelevant. As you have bigger projects and you have more objects on your project, you'll want to put some names on there so that they make sense, but for now we're not really worried about it. So we're going to change this my name to a missing value. So now that value is completely gone. Let's get rid of the Applescript variable. We'll leave that for now. So I think I'm going to show you how to use it. So to change an ObjectiveC variable, there's no space. You set my name, and the first character has to be capital, and underscore follows that, and in parentheses you put the variable, the value that you want to store in that variable, and in this case it's my name. Let's see, for this field, I'm not sure I want to change anything right out of the gate, but what I have to do is I have to link it to I have to link this to this, because that variable, my name, has to be tied to the value, the application delegate of my name. So now, and you will always do this, just do it always, continuously update values. Unless you know that you're never going to update it, just have it continuously update. So when I run this and I click the button for that in the app that's in the Applescript, I shouldn't have nested those dialogues, because nada does nothing, and find then returns the value and it stores it in that field. So I'm going to show you how to reset that here in a minute to a missing or a null value. There's a couple different ways to do that. So let's see. If you click the other button, which would be the else, set my name. So now we're going to give the variable a new name, a new value. And we could just do empty quotes, which is nothing, empty quotes. But the correct way to do that, because you're going to use that, probably this null value in your code more than once, is to define it as a property variable, and we'll give it a missing value, which means nothing. There's nothing in it. So we're going to set that to a null value. So now, click one button, you get my name, which is Kevin. Click the other value, you should get a null value. So if you click that, you should get Kevin. And if you click that, it should reset to null. So that's one way to reset settings or values, or, you know, depending on how complicated this things get. A lot of times you want to, you know, have things reset to a null state when they finish, or you may have a reset button. I mean, you want to just click reset, and the reset button sets all of your variables back to null. So that's how to do that. It's just kind of just change the variable value. Another thing you can do with these cells, sometimes you don't want them to look like editable fields. So we're going to take the background off, take the frame off, and make the behavior none. So now it's going to behave just like a label. So now I think the alignment's going to be off on this. This is not going to look pretty. So the alignment's off, but you can see it doesn't look like editable text now. It just looks like text that's getting updated on the screen and reset on the screen. So you can use your guides and kind of play around with that, and you'll soon figure out how to align objects that don't really have a border or a baseline to text. Baselines don't really exist, and especially if you're using two different objects like a label and a text field, their shape is different, so there's really no easy way to align those. But we'll go back and we'll see if my movement, yeah, I got it pretty close. So it's probably not perfect pixel by pixel, but it's pretty close. Okay, so and we're still working in that one handler called do something. Everything's happening inside this one handler, and the only thing that triggers that handler is clicking that one button. So that one button is basically executing the Applescript code inside of this handler. Let's see, how do we take this a step further without getting too complicated? And I know it's a lot. It is. It's kind of takes some practice, and you've not seen a whole lot of errors in this code, but it's real easy to have a typo. I type the word value wrong a lot, and I don't catch it. So missing, and then I'll type value wrong. And if I don't, it doesn't autocorrect. So if I don't catch it, my code throws an error, and it takes me 10 minutes to find it. So now when I click the button, because the button is tied to this handler, I'm going to set my name to Let's see, static text. Yeah, we'll make it static text, Kevin. And then we're going to set X, which is an Applescript variable, to the current date. And it gets that from the system. So the OS has that. And then we're going to set the date ObjectiveC variable to that Applescript variable, X. Oh, this is going to fail. And you'll see here in just a minute. I'm not going to fix that yet. I want you to see this. So we're going to add another text field. Oh, and you can filter here. If you just type text, it filters out all objects except those that contain the word text. So rather than scrolling down the list looking for something, if you know what it is you're looking for, you can just type in there and narrow your search down. So I'm going to store that date field in here, taking off the border, taking off the background so that it just displays as text. And I have to bind that, again, the AppDelegate for this object is the date. So we go back to the main menu and we put in the date and we want it to continuously update. So it's going to update every time that button's clicked. So we build it, throws an error. Well, it doesn't really throw an error, it just doesn't give you what you think it's going to give you, and I'll explain why. It's because there's a difference between Applescript variables and Objective-C variables, and we have to set this as a string, which is basically it says turn whatever result or whatever value is stored in this variable, set it as basically text. So now it displays the day, month. There's a lot of data in the Mac current date routine. So what we have to do, or the command. So if you wanted to just pull out the time, that's real easy to do. I'll get into that later in another tutorial. But as you can see, it is like an application. You can quit the application. It's even though it's compiled in a temporary environment, it's still acting just like an application. And once you actually build the project, the interface, the Xcode interface won't be necessary. You'll just get the regular application menus, and you can do a command Q to quit just like you would any other app. So let's change this font here. Let's grab a bold font and let's pump the size up, make it a little bigger, and then we're going to have to tweak the size of that text field because the font's actually bigger. Get rid of the red lines, and when we run it, we see big bold Kevin and the date is populated. Every time we click the button, it executes that handler again, which refreshes that currently or constantly updating value of the variable the date, which is bound to that field. So, all right, let's see. That was simple. Well, it wasn't a lot, but it really is a lot when you've not done it. If you've never actually been through this, it's kind of cool to actually make this work. And I'll show you a project that I built just in brevity here in just a minute when we're done with this tutorial. And you can see that you can make the interface look a whole lot better. So properties, we've got Objective-C variables, we've got Applescript variables, and we've got a combination of Applescript variables stored inside of an Objective-C variable. And just note the syntax. If we look at the app delegates, now we can see what the bindings look like. So we can see that step 1, which is the button, is bound to that handler. The value for the reference bindings, my name, and 1 is to the date. So one's to a text field called text field, and one's to a text field called irrelevant. So I'm going to open this code real quick and just kind of show you real quick. So that's the application, that's the interface, and the Applescript that goes along with that. It's a little bit more complicated than the code that we just wrote, and there's several handlers. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 handlers, because it doesn't do a lot. Change the volume, play, pause. So it doesn't do a whole lot. It's just kind of a way for me to have some music playing while I'm doing code without running iTunes, because I like to stream radio stations. So I kind of built a little radio interface that's pulling the live feed from a local radio station that I like. So yeah, there's my radio. And there's the end of the tutorial. So just let me know, leave questions. Be glad to help. Like to see a little bit of interest in some of this. It's really interesting. It can be fun too. You may not be able to save the world, but you can pass some time. And the Mac is really powerful when it comes to little projects like this, much more, I think, so than a Windows environment. So thanks for joining, thanks for watching, and look forward to the next one.